now it's like you feel so, as I did in that basketball game, so like absurdly proud of 8-year-olds' ability to hit a basket and absurdly demoralized when they don't. And so there's so much attached to sports.
Welcome, listeners, to episode number 5 of our podcast, Play On, Why StreetSoccer. My name is John Henderson. I'm the co-host and sidekick to Neal, founder and CEO of Metal Sports. He's our nation's leading advocate for everything street soccer. We're fortunate today to have esteemed author Linda Flanagan, who's just released the book titled Take Back the Game, How Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sports and Why It Matters. So take it away.
Linda, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's get right at it. This book, Take Back the Game, unbelievably chock full of science and research. You have 24 pages of notes alone with your references to so many different experts and articles and research, and it's so well reasoned, and you come at it from many different angles. But I got to say, my favorite angle that you come at this from is as a mom. Mm-hmm. You use your own experiences, especially those with your son. At the time, I think early in the book, he was 9, as an overlay to the present state of youth sports. So through your son, Linda, tell us what you discovered.
Well, I discovered some unpleasant realities about myself, like that I cared too much. I realized, I think I start the book talking about a picayune little basketball game. You know, he was 8 or 9, and I was he played really well, and I kind of strutted out of there like, wow, I am really something, because he had played well and just taken it all in. And I realized then that it really was kind of lame to feel so disproportionately proud of my, 9-year-old's dribbling ability. And it bothered me that this mattered so much, and it even, of course, bothered me that much more when he didn't play well and I was like in the dumps. But I could see how our kids' sports can just take on so much greater weight than they merit, because you feel so much when they're playing. And I gradually became more and more aware of how, sort of unhealthy that is for all concerned.
Can we safely assume that you're a competitive person?
Yes, I would say I am competitive. I mean, I've been I was a quite competitive runner for many years, and I don't race anymore. But I was certainly, I was in it to win it, and or at least to do better in every race. To improve my times. And as a coach, I always wanted to win. Because I write from the point of view of a coach as well, and how we really do have to look beyond the win-loss record. And as easy and tempting as it is to fixate on that, there has to be more at stake for us, or we have to realize how much more important other factors are besides whether or not we win a little dual meet or a little freshman basketball game or whatever it is. There's just so much more at stake. But when you are competitive, it can feel like winning is everything.
Well, so you obviously have a lot of experience. You're a player, you're a coach, and of course you're a mom. And so you're seeing it through a lot of different lenses. And I don't think what you're saying in the book is that competition or being competitive is a bad thing. I think where we may have taken it might be what you have some issues with and what your research shows. And those center on 3 basic things: money, college, and status.
Yes.
I mean, to me, frankly, status is the umbrella over the money and college issues, but let's pare that down. Let's start with money. How does money come into factor? And I want to continue to draw the separation between you and your son, which may have been a very healthy experience for you, and you sound like a great mom and one who's open and willing to read and assess and change, and you've made some great changes we'll talk about later as your son got older. But let's start specifically then with the money. How has the money come in and hurt youth sports?
Well, I heard your other podcast, by the way, with the soccer woman, which was great, and I felt like she and I could, we're on the same page on all of this stuff. And she was also talking about money and how it's a $19 billion industry. It's giant. It's getting bigger. It has grown exponentially over the years. And I wanted to, talk about in my book the factors besides parental, status anxiety, because there are things going on outside the home that have really shaped where we are with youth sports. It's not just parents being crazy. It's because there's all these enterprises out there sort of offering tantalizing prizes and encouraging parents and families to do more and more regardless of the child's developmental abilities or level, or the parent's appetite for that matter. But, the money is huge. It started how we got here was with the recession in the 70s that cut off funding for public parks and recreation facilities. So with the recession and that cutoff in public money, well, there was an opportunity for private companies and businesses to fill that gap. And it was, Disney which bought or built the Wide World Sports Complex in 1997. That kind of ushered in the start of travel sports and sports tourism. And then that added a whole other layer of money. And then, all these trends have just accelerated. And then municipalities picked up on it and we can build a sports complex too. And then we had another recession in 2008, which cut funding even more. So as a result, more individuals have gone in to invest in youth sports as public funding has been withdrawn. So there's just a lot of people profiting off kids' sports. They recognize it's profitable.
Well, and you go further, I believe, in the book and talk about how that evolution from those two recessions then has affected class disparately. So
right.
I think your point is that as the municipalities were building these mega complexes and as clubs were growing and furthering and fueling the pay-to-play system, those without got less.
Yes, right. So now we have, a class-based system of sports in effect. Low-income kids start later, they quit earlier, they're more inactive, and they've all the resulting health consequences that are associated with that. There's more obesity, and all, of course, the trickle-down effects of obesity, which can last a lifetime. So the fact that sports are class-based is, really, it's a public health problem, honestly. So where I describe it as like a feast or famine situation. In low-income areas, there's a famine. There's not enough sports options. And in middle and upper income areas, there's this feasting on it. So there's too much in one place and too little in another. And we need to find some kind of happy medium so that all kids can benefit from sports participation, not just those who can afford it.
And inevitably, we have to get to parents, and that's in the status prong of the three prongs that you say are the core of what's happened to youth sports. And we won't go too deep into the parenting just yet. However, you do differentiate in the book this parenting styles that are predominant in lower income communities versus the more elite suburban white communities, for instance. And those styles tend to be, very simplistically put, hands off. Mm-hmm. In the urban center and helicoptering, if I could be so bold, mm-hmm. And in the suburban. And we'll get to the evolution of that itself. But with that differentiation, if the kids who are getting the hands-off type parenting, why are they receding farther away from sports then?
In the hands-off?
Yeah, if they're already hands-off, why aren't they just going onto the block and playing like you and I did when we grew up?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Except, access. They're not close to those parks. They live in urban areas where there's not some giant field around the corner. I think there's safety issues. And to some extent, some of them probably are still playing, locally and around the corner. But that's a good question. I have to look into that a little more. I think it has to do with city centers, though, mainly, and safety.
Well,
you probably know as well as I,
Right. Couldn't agree here more at Metal Sports, because one of the things that we've realized is that, for instance, just in the soccer world alone, there are over about roughly around 3.5 million players in the U.S. Soccer Federation or under the U.S. Soccer Federation umbrella. It's estimated there's 20 million more who play, which means they're not getting the attention of new facilities, which means they're not getting the attention of organized soccer, mm-hmm. which means that I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing that we aren't throwing more organized soccer at kids, because we do get to that in your book as well. It's not about the over-organization or, doubling down on the organization. In fact, our axiom is very much to the contrary. It's let them play on their own, unstructured, the way you and I did growing up. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you in the same age bracket.
Oh, yes, please don't. Well, but I think maybe those kids, the other 20 million who aren't, was that the number you said, who aren't recognized as part of, the U.S. Soccer Federation, they're not being necessarily noticed by, coaches, college coaches or recruiters, because we know that recruiters go to the club tournaments. So they're not necessarily seeing these kids. Maybe when they get to a certain age, they haven't developed the way they would benefit from coaching when they're teenagers in a way that they don't need when they're 6 and 7 years old. So, there's all kinds of reasons we can speculate about why those kids who are just running around the fields, why they're not making it into the system somehow. But we know that is an issue. Well,
perfect transition then to the second prong of the problem, and that's college. Tell me about what your findings were in terms of how college impacts the problems we're seeing in youth sports.
College is such a crucial part of it because I think it has incentivized parents to kind of go crazy on youth sports because it feels like a way in. The perception is that they're out of sight in terms of cost. They're way more competitive or at least the perception is that it is harder for kids to get in. That's a little bit of a murky question because kids apply to so many more schools now than they ever did that, they may not be certain to get into any one particular school, but they do get into many schools. But anyway, the perception is that it's much more competitive. It is definitely more expensive. So parents feel that the one thing that they can count on is, coaches need to fill their rosters. And college sports have grown. There's now 500,000 kids who play sports in college, roughly. And there's also the thought of maybe getting some kind of scholarship. There's $3.6 billion offered in scholarship money to athletes. So there's these kinds of rewards that attract families to think, maybe if we go down this route, go all in on soccer, lacrosse, whatever it is, tennis, we'll have a good shot at getting in. And in fact, they do often. Many of the wealthy sports do favor the kids who have managed to get through all of this without being catastrophically injured. They sometimes will make those teams and get recruited.
We're finding an interesting phenomenon with that, though, because not all sports have as their ultimate goal or the brass ring college anymore. College used to be the obvious pathway to professional, right? College was the only way you can go to professional basketball, football. It's simply not the case anymore. Hockey, you're either going to a prep school or a junior program before you even consider college. And some now consider college to be the least likely place you're going to get drafted from. Kids are being drafted when they're 14, 15, 16 years old. And now they're going into the National Hockey League at 17, 18, 19, deferring college altogether. Well, the same thing's true with so many other sports now. Gymnastics. College gymnastics is not the pathway to the Olympics. And so many other sports fall into that area. And so it seems as though, maybe this is just underscoring your point that we put a false belief in that we have to work so hard to get into college or else.
Well, but also I think part of the goal is not to make the teams in order to compete on that team. It's to make the team in order to get into the college. We don't know what the attrition rate is because it's not made clear. The colleges don't advertise how many kids quit. But I feel quite certain that a large percentage of kids, I would bet the majority, especially those who aren't on scholarship, do not make it for 4 years. I think for many, it's a way to get into a better school. It's not to go on and compete at the highest level. And of course, for some kids and young adults, that's exactly what it is. And they love it and it's perfect. But I think because of these perverse incentives, the cost of college, the competitiveness of it, selectivity of it, the sports are just kind of a way to game the system in a way. It has nothing to do with love of the game, or that's at least lower on the list of priorities.
Well, that's a great point because you reference one of the statistics that's commonly known. 70% of kids by the time they're age 13 drop out of youth sports. And number one reason given, it's not fun. There's other reasons, of course, as well. But I don't have the research to back this, but I would, as you just pointed out, it could very well be that when they get to college, they realize just how much not fun it is.
Yeah. Yes.
And that might be why the club programs are doing so well right now. The club programs are getting huge amounts of money.
Oh, at colleges, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where it is fun. And it tends to be, more driven by the young adults who are managing it. Clubs are just, it's about, love of the game. It's about fun. It's about being with their peers. I mean, I'm all for club and intramural at college level. And by the way, if we could do this in high schools, that would be great too. I was really stunned in my research to find how the kind of data that comes out of the goals survey. Have you ever looked at that? The NCAA's, and I don't remember what goals stands for, but it's one of those tidy little acronyms that is basically a survey of college athletes' well-being. And I think it's about 20,000. It's a really healthy sample size. And the findings are startling, how much time they devote. They devote in season. The Division I athletes reported spending 33 hours a week on their sport and 35 hours on their schoolwork. I mean, that is an insane amount of time to spend. I mean, there's basically have 2 full-time jobs. And out of season at the Division I and II level, they spend almost as much time on their sport as they do in season. Most of the mini college athletes, I think it was about a third, reported that they felt overwhelmed and just incapable of handling everything. So, to me, it's no great surprise that a lot of young people who have been through a system that is all-consuming from a young age, by the time they've gotten the brass ring, which is being recruited, yay, then they hate it. And it's like, okay, I don't need it anymore. And they're just done with it.
If they loved it, even going in.
Yeah.
Right? Because who are they doing it for? Great transition once again. Let's talk about status and parenting.
Well, see, I feel like when I listened to that podcast you had, tell me the one with Joanne? Was that
Joanna Lohman, former women's national team player and former professional player. Very well spoken.
She was wonderful. I felt like the emphasis was on money so much, and I can't overlook money, but it's not the only thing, the only factor. And I'm not even sure it's the most important factor. I don't know for sure, but the way parents have come to view our children, and this, as I go into in the book, is a function of all kinds of socioeconomic, cultural changes that occurred, again, beginning in around the 70s, when kids became more scarce and more precious. And there was a change in how we viewed them and our duties to them. So they became more a reflection of our standing, our ability as parents, as adults. Are we good people? And this is a shift. Wasn't like this before. I always say, I'm sure my parents loved me as much as I love my kids, but it wasn't expressed this way. They didn't drive us all over the place. And I like to think that if all the club and stuff was around when I was young, that they wouldn't have anyway, because they were like, I'm sorry, we have our own lives. Thank you very much. But that has shifted so that now it's like you feel so, as I did in that basketball game, so absurdly proud of your 8-year-old's, ability to hit a basket, and absurdly demoralized when they don't. And so there's so much attached to sports. And because they're public, I think parents, we feel this way about their grades, and in certain communities, it's about them doing well. And of course, grades are important too, but they're not as public, and sports are so public. It's out there in front of everybody. So that the way sports elevate the parents, I think, is enormously important in terms of driving so much of this, driving the excesses. And I think it starts in a good place generally. I mean, I do think we mostly wanted our kids to do well because we know it's good for them, but it does kind of, creep over into being a little more unhealthy.
Well, there's talk in your book even about some research that suggests that this grit that we think that they're developing, this character development component of sports, happens to them as an entire person and not just to the one that's sitting at the plate with the bat about to, the bottom of the ninth and down a run and eyeing that pitcher with the pitch coming in. So yes, I think that sports has done great things for people, and the research that we do have, and I coach high school sports, is that there's better GPAs, there's just better attendance, there's better health, of course, but there are a lot of benefits of, and even Joanna was very adamant about that. And we have another podcast coming up here shortly with Skip Gilbert, head of U.S. Youth Soccer, who agrees that the pay-to-play system is broken, but we have to recognize the great things that have come from it and that can continue to come from it. But I think what you hit on here, and through your own experiences and through the research, really is that umbrella over both money and college. I think that the money issues and the college issues don't develop unless we have this personal conundrum that we have. And I know there's a connection conundrum that you bring up later in the book on the 6 paradoxes, but this personal conundrum we have about our value system, our how we're seen, how we value ourselves, how we assess ourselves is somehow dependent on the performance of our kids on the field. Yeah. And that's a brutal connection.
It is. It really is. And it's also, I think, tied to, it's really hard being a mother or father. It's just really hard, I think, nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just making it up as we go along. And, there's all kinds of things that go wrong. You don't know how things, we're all just kind of trying to figure it out. And you look around, you look to your left, to your right, and what are your friends doing? And, who am I to say, my children don't have to do that particular travel thing if everyone else is doing it? What do I know? I think that's kind of how you come at it when you're a young parent, unless you're like extremely confident. And I don't really know many parents who are, at least to admit to that. So there's a social contagion element where you just kind of go along with what everyone's doing because, what do I know? And I get that. And I felt that to some extent myself, even though I also felt like, what is this? This is crazy. Why are we doing this? I mean, at various points in my son's athletic career, I felt like this is just insane. It's stupid.
Well, never so much as
many parents feel like that.
Yeah, well, I do. I think they do question it more often than they're willing to admit because they don't want to buck the system. And you do believe that if Sam's kid is getting a coach and he's 3 years old and he's training him how to be a professional athlete, then maybe I need to do the same thing. Otherwise, either A, I'm not going to look like as good of a parent as Sam, or my kid's going to be feeling left out, or all these reasons. And you drove your son up to see to realize that Dunder Mifflin was a fictional place.
Yeah.
But
I knew it was fictitious. I just wanted to see if it was there was anything there, any little building that might resemble Dunder Mifflin.
But you were on a mission. You were on a mission to do good by him.
Yeah.
And you thought you were serving him well, taking him into AAU, and it clearly was not his choice that drove that decision. And so I'm going to go to something that you called kids lobbying parents, which you use as a subset of, the money and perhaps the college issue, but more the money. I mean, look, we can't lose sight of the fact that the money issues that you identify and the college issues you identify are being driven by people.
Yes.
Those people are parents. When we had a soccer convention recently, at one of the largest conventions in the United States, and they have a 300,000 square foot exhibition floor where you have every possible gadget and contraption and travel option, and this is how you're going to be better, and this is how you're going to be better, and this is going to be better. And some of my European colleagues came over and they said, "What are you doing to this sport?"
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, it's all ridiculous.
Right. Well, that money came from us wanting to find new ways of making our kids better. If you don't have these shoes, you're not going to be as good as the next guy. If you don't have this hockey stick, you're not going to be as good as the next girl. If you don't have, and so that's why I keep coming back to the idea that status component you identify is so compelling, and that we have come into a generation of people who are, basically judging themselves through their kids and living vicariously through their kids. And you even pointed out in the book, this idea of, how many pickup games should your parents attend when you're between 3 and 10 years old? The answer should be 0. But And that goes back to that dynamic you were talking about and the differentiation between inner city parenting and the evolution of the more suburban elitist parenting. And so we've lost that. We've lost the idea to get our hands off of it. You talked about the point of ownership. We've lost the idea of giving ownership to the kids, which is what you identify as so good in college club sports. They get to control their destiny. They get to control their program. They drive the bus, literally and figuratively, to the games.
Yeah.
So let's go to the 6 paradoxes. And these are, a series of truths as I see them, the uncomfortable truths that no one wants. No one wants to admit this. And the first one is, and let me say as a caveat here, we're already like almost a half hour into this podcast. I could talk to you about this for hours.
I know. It does when you're interested in the subject,
I hate leaving any one of the subjects that we touched on already. So I hate moving on, but okay, we have to for the sake of time and our afternoon commitments to get our kids to soccer practice. Okay, the 6 paradoxes of youth. You start with the myth of character building. We touched on that, but give me a little bit more there.
Basically, we all like to believe that, sports are inherently good for building a kid's character, and depending on how you define character, but, generally makes them have integrity, be honest, have some grit and toughness, be, good in a foxhole, that kind of thing. The kind of qualities we want, what we would consider being a responsible, honest person. But in fact, there's really no evidence that sports do this. There have been studies that don't show a link or that don't clarify that it comes from sports. See, that's the thing, because human beings don't lend themselves to controlled experiments. And it's impossible to say whether or not you or I'm quite self-disciplined. Is that because I'm a runner, or am I a disciplined runner because I'm a disciplined person? And that it's just very, very hard to know what is the cause, what causes how we turn out. So there's no evidence that sports build character. What the authorities that I spoke to all agreed that it's entirely dependent on the context. It depends on the coach, depends on the team culture. It depends on what's going on at home, the parental attitude towards sports. Kids can get terrible things from sports, terrible lessons, terrible experiences. And I've heard a lot of, feedback on the book about, how various adults hated their sports experience, and hated gym class. It's entirely dependent on context. It can be a wonderful experience where you grow, you have a coach who is, has got his or her priorities right and is teaching valuable lessons and treats the kids fairly, but it is not a given. It is just flat out not a given that sports build character. So that's the first paradox.
Well, I think that still comes back to the parent. And, I'm going to do a lot of parent blaming here. And I think that they deserve a lot of the blame. And I'm not saying that they're all bad people, that they didn't have big hearts and they weren't trying. But to your point, there's a rising tide and we all kind of go up with it. And we all believe that this is what needs to be done. And we've got this this endemic belief that there is character building. Well, you don't build the character if you don't build the person first. And to the extent that we're building an athlete first, you're never going to get that character. So I do see where you can't draw that direct pathway without first just looking at how the kid is developed. And to your point, you can't go around questioning people's parenting theories and beliefs. It's just not allowed. And that's probably why there's not a lot of research on it, because who's going to submit to that? But anecdotally, I was taking my 12-year-old nephew. I used to race mountain bikes, and he went to the youth race that was there at this mountain bike race I was at. And in the youth race, there were 50, 60 kids, and they had $1,000, $1,500 bicycles, and they were all in their spandex outfits, and they were glistening. All these kids were glistening. And then there was this one kid, and he was a black kid. He was about 12 years old, and he was on a rusty Schwinn Stingray. And he won the race.
It's not about the bike, as Lance Armstrong said.
Not about the bike. No, well, he's got other reasons.
That's right. About the drugs.
Okay, number 2 paradox, the parent trap. What's that?
Well, as I said before, I do think I might be giving parents a little more the benefit of the doubt than you, but I do think most of us start out with the best intentions. It's a stew of good intentions, anxiety, confusion, just kind of winging it that gets us to go follow this path, like sign them up for these things. I think we get into trouble especially when a child shows a little bit of ability or skill, because then it's like it takes on a life of its own. And then suddenly it morphs from, I just want my child to be happy and to enjoy sports, to, wow, this makes me feel great when they're out there doing, lighting up the court. Then it becomes more about what serves the parent's ego. And again, I would put myself in that camp. I understand how that feels. It is just, but it's not healthy. It's not good for kids when it becomes about what's driving it is the parent's ego demands rather than the child's interests. So that the trap there is that it can start out fine, but it can morph if you're not really careful.
It's incredible, the fine line, the nuanced differentiation between the happiness you get from your kid's great dunk or shot or defense versus the happiness in seeing how happy your kid is doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we get preoccupied on the outcome and the scores way more than we do on just how fun it is to watch them play and be happy doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I love the PCA, Positive Coaching Alliance motto is what you should tell your kids when you're talking about sports is, I love to watch you play. That's it. It's not, why didn't you go in for the layup? And, there's a whole slew of things that we say that are wrong. But if you just kind of encourage I'm happy, I'm here because I love to watch you play, no matter how you play.
Yeah. Well, like the issues we're seeing develop in even professional level sports for women with the Yates report recently, I think that what you just described, that parent that's coaching and sometimes berating the kid all the way home about what you could have done better, what you try harder, or coaches, one of the things that gets the hair on the back of my neck is coaches that feel the need to have a half-hour talk with their team after a loss, like right then and there. Feeling bad enough that they lost the game, and now you're going to drill home to them what they could have done better.
How they screwed everything up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ooh.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the soccer, the Yates report, because I feel like, every few years we have a new revelation about some sports horror show, whether it's gymnastics a few years ago, now it's soccer, what's next? And I think what people are missing is, how could this happen? I've heard people say, how could this happen? These athletes, they're tolerating this abuse, or how can the coaches do this? Look at the Catholic Church, and I think what we're missing is that it is happening is so pervasive, like you're saying, that it's routine for coaches to yell and belittle little players. And by high school, forget about it. They can just be screamed at so that it just is normalized. And I think once being screamed at is normalized, it's very hard to know when you've crossed some boundary that's that much worse. If you're being shrieked at, is that better or worse than, being told to kiss your teammate, which is what happened in this soccer thing? I mean, that's terrible. It's a kind of a different order of issues, but, maybe you'd rather do that than be screamed at. I just think we've normalized it and it's everywhere. So until we make the decision, as a country or, starting in schools or wherever, that we're not going to tolerate that by coaches and parents, by the way, on the sidelines, until we just decide that's not okay, this kind of thing is going to keep happening.
Yeah. I mean, why would a parent not pull their kid from a program like that? Well, it's the fear of the backlash. It's the fear of them not getting playing time. It's the fear of, not fitting in with their peers. I mean, there's, again, these pressures come from these many different angles, none of which are truly for the benefit of the kid.
Yeah.
And they don't serve the kid in the long term. We accept this for so many reasons, but it's, again, back to your points on college and money, but of course the status issue, because Imagine if that coach stopped doing it that way. Imagine if a coach did what a coach is supposed to do, and that is talk maybe 5 minutes of a 60-minute practice. Then if some parent were watching that, say, well, you're not doing a good job coaching my kid because you're not yelling at him all the time. And if only you made him do this, he'd be a much better player. But you don't do that. So therefore, I'm going to the board and I'm going to complain about you.
Yeah, right. But then you have other examples like Steve Kerr, who's, a gentleman on the court and who is clearly not, doesn't believe in that kind of maniacal approach. And I would argue that those teams that do well succeed despite the yelling and screaming, or they're certainly playing out of fear. So, they're trying to do anything to avoid messing up rather than enjoying the game.
Well, I certainly don't believe that being yelled and screamed at and being able to figure out how to navigate that builds character. I think that builds a numbness and a numbness to an endemic system that is just out of control. But okay, that's just the world according to Neal. Next paradox, body slam.
Yes. Okay. Well, the paradox is sports really exercise is so wonderful for everyone. We know this, every week the New York Times has a new story, a new angle on how sports exercise and movement are good for your body, your mind, your relationships. That's kind of like established. Okay. But what we've done now, the way we have this feast or famine environment, low-income kids don't have the opportunity to play. So their health is being undermined. There are weight issues and greater inactivity, quitting. There's a real health problem there. And on the middle and upper income side, the feasting has led to these, injuries that are entirely preventable. 50% of sports injuries are overuse injuries, which means they're entirely preventable. And some of the injuries are pretty, it may be slight hyperbole to call an ACL tear catastrophic, but, if I tore my ACL, I would consider it a catastrophe. And if my 7th grade daughter out there playing lacrosse tore her ACL, I would consider that a catastrophe because in 10 years, she might have arthritis. Like these injuries, physical injuries, and then the mental health issues that the pressure and the competitiveness are imposing on kids. It's just robbed sports of the health benefits. It should be great, but we've taken them away, or we've certainly chipped away at those benefits by the way we provide sports now.
Okay, next paradox, lonely at the top.
Yeah, well, this is about mental health and how, again, sports do great things for your mood. They diminish depression, they reduce anxiety, they help you think better. All of these are great for your mental health, clearing your head. And, they're so beneficial that, some doctors prescribe exercise to thwart depression. But now the way we do them, they're so intense. There's been, and this is another thing that has been a little bit understudied, but I think less so as we move forward, because obviously there's a mental health crisis with young people now. But, the National Athletic Trainers Association in 2015 put out a statement saying we have a problem with mental health among high school athletes. There's a greater incidence of depression, anxiety, sleep problems, anger, weight issues. This was reiterated to me by another sports psychologist who said it's the professional consensus that this is a problem among high school athletes. So we need to address this problem. We can't just look away. It's too intense. It is not fun. And certainly, especially at the most competitive schools and the most competitive environments, it is really challenging for a good number of kids. Not all of them, but a good number of them.
Yeah, clearly. All right, and we're going to hit the last two quickly here. Coaches?
Yes, coaches should be excellent. I mean, you would think they would be because we seem to care so much about sports, but we don't put any money into training them. I know when I went to coach my son's baseball team, it was like, okay, thanks so much. And I think most parents assume that coaches have a clue, but even high school coaches don't get much in the way of training. It's certainly not beyond first aid and CPR. I'm not even talking about like training in the mechanics of the sport, but in like how to work with kids, what's developmentally appropriate. How do I talk to young people? I think so. Coaches should be great. We seem to care so much about sports, but we don't do a great job of developing coaches who are qualified and that's why they always often resort to the screaming. And it's like, well, that's what everyone else is doing. I guess, I watch it on TV and that must be the way to coach.
Even some of the programs, for instance, like soccer, where they do have pretty comprehensive training programs and multiple levels of training from, the E license all the way up to the professional license or club license. Even those who are highly trained in those systems are still people, and they're still parents, and they're still motivated by wins and losses. And so you can't teach that out of someone.
I agree.
And I watched a very high ranking female coach in the soccer program, nationally recognized talent. And she was coaching a bunch of high school girls, and literally for 15 minutes, she talked, and the girls weren't moving, didn't do a thing during that 15 minutes. And I'm like, how did she get here? I don't understand. And then even worse, so I coach both boys and girls high school. And if you as a coach don't recognize the very, very sharp differences in coaching a female athlete versus a male athlete, which we're finding is a pervasive problem, hence the Yates report. But if you don't recognize the very dramatic differences, then you can't be even a good coach, let alone a great coach. And they don't teach the differences until the A license. A license is for the highest, most elite level players in the national programs or who are Olympic bound. We're talking the top of the top for A license, meaning you can get away being a coach of a bunch of high school girls without being taught the differences between the two. It's stunning to me. I do think it's a big problem, and not just do they get the development, but what is the development that we're giving them? What are we teaching them?
Yeah.
And I know we can go real deep on that one too, but let's go to the connection conundrum. What the heck is that?
Well, that is, one of the most wonderful things about sports, certainly in my own experience, and whenever anybody talks about their sports experience and what they learned, it's often about their teammates and about the bonds they formed, and like the strong affection players have with their teammates and in their communities. I mean, I think playing for a high school team can be just so deeply rewarding because it's your community, it's your town, maybe your parents are there, your friends' parents. It's like very close and tight. That's why they're so important, especially now when we're so divided. And yet the way we do it now, where we the club teams pluck away the best kids, and the local stuff can't even field a team because no one's, everyone's gone, or it's not competitive, it's not good enough. So the community aspect, which is one of the whole reasons for youth sports, to bring people together, it's been eaten away. I think that's a terrible loss.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, the pathway now to go to higher levels is not necessarily through either the college or the high school.
Yeah.
We've taken the high school away from that. And we have to remember that some of the best players in basketball, for instance, weren't even coached until they got to high school.
Yeah.
And that's true around the world in terms of soccer, but not here in the U.S. And so, as a high school coach, I can speak directly on that point as you can. We often get even professional players that come back and say their best experience in their entire career was when they were in high school, to your point, playing with their friends, playing in front of their community, representing their colors as they walk down the hall after a game every day. And we've stripped them of that, which brings us back to the fixes. And we're going to tease the audience by saying, get the book.
Yes, there you go.
We will absolutely not have time to do the fixes today, but they do focus on many of these paradoxes, and they do so quite well. And there are reform opportunities and bold ideas and models that are identified, and some of the developmental ideas on coaches. But I still say it comes back to the parents. We've got to change our attitudes towards this, and we have to do what the book says. We have to take back the game. Though I'm going to throw out one little thing here, Linda. To me, if I were to name the book, I'd say let's give back the game. You got to give it back to the youth.
Oh,
because I don't want the reader to take it back, because that would be a parent getting the game back again.
Well,
I don't know what they've done with it.
But we're the ones who messed it up. So we're the ones that write the checks, that drive them to practice, all this. We're the ones that have messed it up. So we've got to find a way to return the game to kids.
Absolutely.
How about that?
Absolutely.
But I hear you.
Yeah, no, singing our songs for sure. And we're going to sing yours. And your book is outstanding and everyone should get it. Should be right on the, and it comes mostly in hardcover, which makes it a great coffee table book for all your friends who come over to see it too. But you've got to get it for no other reason than to find out more about Linda's background, because it's stunning. And that would be another podcast episode altogether. So get the book. Take Back the Game, How Money and Mania Are Ruining Kids' Sports and Why It Matters by Linda Flanagan. Linda, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
I hope we get to converse about this more down the road. I want to hear where you go with it and hear more about your son's journey and your coaching journey. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right, that's a wrap. Many thanks to Linda Flanagan. Wow, fantastic episode. Follow Linda Flanagan on Twitter, @LindaFlanagan2. That's the number 2, @LindaFlanagan2. Hey, thanks for your likes and your feedback and your comments. We love doing the show. You love hearing it, so we're going to keep it going. Next episode, wow, Eddie Henderson made it to the national team, having started his playing career for the first 12 or so years in the streets, in the alley behind his house in Seattle. So that's the way it's done, folks, all around the world. We got to do it here. Until then, play on.